Hi, everyone. My name is Renee Adams. I'm a professor of finance at Said Business School. So the title of the webinar today is The Myth of Meritocracy, Lessons from the Art World and Why Investing in Women is Important. And I have three other experts here with me today, Lizzie Collins, Brunella Bruno, Sharon Hecker, to help us dissect this question. So I'm going to give a little, background before we get into the nitty-gritty in the discussion. So essentially, what is this webinar about? It's a reaction to what's going on in the US, where President Trump has made a series of executive orders to decrease support of women and minorities for the stated purpose of bringing back the meritocracy. So this framing, of course, suggests that women and minorities produce work of less quality. Now, the art world is actually a really interesting setting for looking at questions of merit, as artworks tend to be produced by one person, which means you can really measure the quality of the output very clearly and attribute it to the person making it. Moreover, there are longstanding debates regarding women's representation in the art world that are relevant for understanding the importance of merit. George Baselitz, or Georg Baselitz, famously argued that female artists do not belong to the meritocracy in the art world because prices for women's paintings are lower. Therefore, he inferred that women can't paint. And as Georg Baselitz says, the market is always right. So now I'm gonna hand over to Lizzie, who's gonna moderate this panel where we're gonna discuss how we think about meritocracy and what the art world can tell us about this topic.
Thank you, Annie. Well, I think it'd be good to do some introductions. So first of all, I'm Lizzie Collins and I'm an art advisor. I run an advisory called Stoneman Collins, and until recently, I had a gallery as well. I've been working in the art world for far too long, since I was 16, actually. So I have a lot of experience in the art world, and it's really great to be at this discussion. I've also helped set up Art at Said, and we've had several exhibitions, and it's really great that we've got this new one in Pursuit of Beauty. And if you haven't seen it, you should go and see. So that's going to be something that we're discussing at the moment. Can I just briefly hand over to Sharon to introduce herself?
Yes, hello to everybody. I'm an art historian and a curator. I live in Italy, and I've written several books about women artists in Italy and creative couples in Italy.
And Brunella, could we hand to you now?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm a professor of finance at Bocconi University in Milano, and I've started working on art and finance since early 2000, when I had the chance to combine my passion for art with what I do as main job.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Brunella. And I think actually, if we could sort of stick with you for the first question, I think because you've got this really clear insight into art and finance, it'd be really interesting if you could give us some of the stylized facts on women's participation. For example, from TEFF to Art Basel. What have you discovered in your research?
Okay, thank you for the question. So first, the way I would like to address the question is looking at representation in both galleries and sales at auction, and how prices has evolved. We also providing some evidence, as you asked, on recent TEFF and the Basel fairs. By reading all this art and finance report, my feeling is that representation has increased over time. Just to provide you with some numbers, for instance, if we focus on art galleries in particular, in 2018, only 1/3 of art exhibited was by female artists, and the percentage now is over 40%. And this is the case especially of galleries that work in the primary market, that is, they exhibit the work of the artist for the very first time. Same as for sales, in terms of sales. So if we look at statistics, also the percentage of sales of artworks by women has increased over this 2018-2024 by nearly 30% to over 40%, and this is also good news. In terms of types of galleries, though, the ones that seems to be say, more active in exhibiting works by female are the smaller one, by turnover, while the largest ones seems to have reduced the attention they have been dedicated to women over the last years. If we move to auction, so instead, in terms of prices, this is a pretty striking evidence, I would say. In 2024, in the top 50 lots sold at auction across all sectors, there were only 3 female artists, 3 out of the 50 of the top sellers by price. But in terms of the sales, the number is a bit higher. We have 4 female artists in the top 50 artists in terms of total sales. And most of these belong to the post-war and contemporary category. And in terms of trend, this is an improving trend, meaning that in past years, the percentage was even lower. But then these numbers belong to basically 2-3 artists. So there is a strong concentration in very good artists, but there are just a few of them are female artists. And as for TEFF and Basil first, it seems that the number of artists, both recent ones, both well-established artists, has increased. So the number of booths exhibiting female artists has increased in the very last.
So what do you think is causing it to increase? What do you think? So it seems to be like the auctions kind of, like you say, it's very concentrated on three artists. We can probably unpack that in a bit, but what's it causing the galleries to increase by 30 to 40% in the last 6 years? And I guess TEFF and Basel are kind of showcases of galleries, so it does kind of make sense that they are also increasing in a similar way. What do you think is driving that?
I think a greater awareness of and all the efforts. I mean, there is this gender debate that has interested every industry. Okay, from education, so any industry, I would say, and also this is now the turn of art, and the point of meritocracy in the art market is in the cultural context. I would say even more striking in a sense, because it's so hard to attribute value that it is extremely difficult to say that what is good or not good. And then when it is given the chance to female artists to emerge, to get into the market, to become a little bit more commercial, it is available. At that point, if something is available, you can buy it.
But what do you think has made that shift? I wonder whether it's about leadership, whether it's about women getting their jobs within the market. Like there must be a reason to help the shift.
My feeling is that I do not see. I mean, my feeling is that it is the increasing awareness that has made perhaps some galleries more, say, brave or say more interested at some point. So I cannot really say if there was an event, a trigger event that shifted. I think it was more like a step-by-step, little by little process motivated by the increasing debate on this. And then the awareness that there are great artists independent of the gender. It's simply the market some realized that, you know what, John Mitchell is as good as Pollock. And I mean, in terms of beauty of the piece of art. And what it is, what I think it's become a little bit also possible is that still price of art by women remains less costly, which made this more affordable even for the high net worth individuals that have increased their collection to of women artists. I guess also because they have understood that you can get very top quality paintings at
Yeah,
on
so
the
this was an
side.
interesting thing that came out in your article, which was that actually ultra high net worth collectors are more supportive of women artists or have a greater proportion of women artists in their collections than people who are less rich. Um, and so your reasoning for that is that they've got more money to buy more art, or what is it that you think?
Okay, this can be one reason. The second reason is that they can have behind them good art advisors that have also understood that you can find jewels, gems in being more diverse and open your eyes and looking around. This is also a possibility. Then I
I
guess
like
this
that
is
answer. Can I just say, as an art
yes.
advisor?
This is also possible because I got this I read this interview from an art advisor of a high profile male collectors that simply says the reason why I'm doing this is because so she says my job as an art advisor is to find really good and sorry I'm just quoting and strong artworks for the best budget possible. And so far, art by women is price quality for art by women. Price quality connection seem extremely good. So that's
Yeah,
the point
that's
she
a really
made.
strong argument for investing in women, isn't it? That for the price for quality, you're going to get a really something really amazing. I guess this is quite a good point to go to Renee with her work on the numbers as well, because we touched on auction with your work, Brunella, and the increase there, but it's also very, very sort of concentrated on a few artists. I don't know, Renee. Well, I do know, Renee. Would you be able to talk to us a bit more about your work on the numbers in the auction and what you found?
Yeah, so thanks for asking, Lizzie. So I guess this gets back to the question of why are the prices for women lower, right? I mean, it's like an ongoing mystery. So it's like great for collectors if they can buy, work by women artists at a low price. Maybe not so good for the female artists, right? So we really have to understand what's driving this price difference. And to get at this question a bit, I'm going to do a little bit of an audience experiment. So we're going to do an experiment. We're going to show two artworks that are currently in the exhibition at Said Business School. And you, as audience members, are supposed to guess whether the artist is a man or a woman. So the first artwork is up, and audience members, please vote. I'm just waiting for the results to come through.
I think they're in the chat.
In the chat. Okay. All right. Whoops. For some reason my oops. Okay. So it's fascinating. 50-50, man or woman. Okay. And the next we have one more image. So please vote again. Okay, so the second one was 42% man and 58% woman. Okay, so it turns out that the first image was the artist was Amy Albers, so a woman, and the second image belonged to Joseph Albers, a man. And it's interesting that more audience participants actually thought the second one was the artist was a woman,
Yeah.
and which sort of turns out exactly as I'd hoped. The results. The point of the experiment is essentially to highlight that if you look at an artwork, it's very difficult to infer the identity or any characteristics of the artist, which then raises the question, why should there be a price difference? Right. And so in our work, basically what we found looking at auction prices is that a big explanation or a major explanation is cultural bias. So essentially we find that the discount for paintings painted by women relative to paintings painted by men is much lower in countries that are more gender equal, which then suggests that cultural factors play a major role in the pricing of art. So it's not that the quality of the art is different, is that the perception of the identity matters for the artwork, which then, of course, raises important questions about the notion of meritocracy, right? So if your identity matters, not the quality of the art, then, obviously we can't use the price to say, well, just because the price is low, it means the work is bad. That's not what the price means. It's the price is low because you've decided to value it at a lower level, not because the quality is worse, right? And so in some sense, our work is contradicting what Georg Baselitz says. So Baselitz says the market is always right. And actually, we argue that the market is not always right. And there's important reasons why it's not always right. It's because of the power dynamics in the art market, the transparency, there's who gets to be shown in galleries, whose work do we see in museums. All of those things are very important factors that mean that the market doesn't necessarily work the way that people sort of think it should work.
This might be a good point to bring in Sharon. Sharon's done a lot of work about sort of women and studied a lot of female artists. Sharon, perhaps you could tell us a bit more from your perspective. What are the barriers to women artists in their work and achieving success financially and from a kind of cultural point of view?
Yes, I find that very interesting what Renee just said about valuing, because it's very much a systemic problem, and it unfolds, I think, in the personal and the professional realms. So how do you get to the financial economic devaluation? There's an interconnectedness. And when we wrote a book about Italian women artists, it really showed us how in the art world, the road to success, well, of course, Lizzie, since you have been in the art world as long as I have, that becoming a successful artist is a long road, and it depends on so many mixes of factors. If you think about historically, women who wanted to become artists, they didn't have female role models to emulate. There were no school textbooks that showed images of women artists, and so they had nobody to sort of mirror. And I was thinking that actually one of the questions that was posed to Brunella about collectors wanting to buy more, that might be also because we have more female collectors and they would like to mirror in female artists. And so, of course, that's still the case in Italy today, by the way, that we don't have any female artists in the textbooks all the way through high school and college. Why? Because these curricula were written by men and the textbooks were written by men. And so they didn't change much over time. We know that in history, women couldn't get training. They couldn't go to academies. They had fewer financial resources. That means you can't buy material. You can't buy equipment. You can't pay models. You can't pay assistants. You can't set up a studio. You can't have Virginia Woolf's room of one's own. And so you can't work undisturbed. And they'd have to work in the house instead and be constantly distracted or interrupted. Interruptions was a huge comment in our discussions with artists, because daily life kind of intrudes all the time. And that's still very true today. One example we had was this Italian artist named Marcella Campagnano, who said that she was so poor, she didn't have the money to buy a backdrop for the photos that she was making. And she told her husband to go out for the afternoon, and she put her friends in her living room so she could photograph them. But then she had to use the gray rug as the backdrop because that's all she had. So, that's the way women artists have had to work. And Phillida Barlow is a very famous British artist who was in the Venice Biennale in 2017, speaks a lot about her difficulties in carving out time to work with all the many children she had to look after. It's just a huge struggle to break into male-dominated spaces for women. I mean, galleries, art movements, museums. That's why, Linda Nochlin wrote her famous essay about why are there no famous women artists. If you look at Italian artists, Arte Povera, for example, there's only one woman, Marisa Mertz, and she was only discovered when she was in her late 90s as part of Arte Povera, and she's recently been included in a show after her death at the Pinot collection in Paris. So why was there only one Italian woman artist in this whole movement? You know, there are photographs of these men hanging out with male curators like Germano Celant and others, and it was just a very male-dominated movement that it was very hard to break into. I mean, there's so many studies out there showing how women see this and understand these barriers, these systemic barriers to getting in, to getting representation, to getting recognition, to getting financial success. I mean, I don't know, but I think there's still, maybe Lizzie knows more, that they're vastly underrepresented in museums, even though we're seeing, you know, some shows. But it's usually a bit like, yes, we have a woman artist too. We are adding in Artemisia Gentileschi as our one Renaissance artist into our collection, or, you know, it's a lip service still to say, oh, okay, we're with the times. But even at TEFAF, it was really interesting this year because there was a work by Camille Claudel that has long been attributed to Rodin. And this is the first time it was ever shown that it actually turned out it was she who had made it. So this brings up a lot of questions of the hands behind the work and the relationships in couples, for example, where there are two artists and one gets the credit and the other one stays in the shadows, or if one gets very good, like is very talented, then there can be a lot of competition, and it can bust up the relationship between two artists because obviously the woman artist might choose to preserve the relationship over her career. And there's lots of ways that women just don't have the same visibility or don't have access to the same visibility, down to networking conversations where a woman will have less airtime to talk about her work. So we've seen the dynamics of this over and over again. And obviously all this leads to what Renee has found is this disparity in valuing the works.
What do you think about those women who have kind of been reconsidered or who have been discovered? Like, how has that happened for them and who is driving that? Because I think that's quite an interesting thing. Because if you look at Barbara Hepworth, who we were talking about just before we went live with the webinar, you know, her prices were severely lagging behind Henry Moore's for many, many years. And now she has her own dedicated museum up, you know, the Hepworth Wakefield. And obviously she's extremely well known. I think even maybe becoming more well known than Moore now because of that museum. But what drove that? And I guess, you know, we also talked about how during his lifetime, Henry Moore had the foundation. He had like all the trust set up. Is it down to relatives? Like, what are the driving factors to kind of really help women come to the fore?
That's interesting. I think a lot of it is posthumous. People who cared enough to really push. There's so many. Eva Hesse, Anna Mendieta were such great artists, but only came out later because there was an interest in them. Again, if I think back even 20 years, it was almost impossible to get a book published on a female artist. So again, there wasn't the awareness of these artists' existence. Catalog raisonnés don't tend to privilege women artists because they cost a lot to make. So and this is something we're still working a lot with. For example, at the Catalog Raisonné Foundation this year, we're going to be dedicating to the question of why women don't have catalog raisonnés. And it's a huge problem. How do we bring them into visibility? I don't think we're at all there yet. There are a few cases, like Brunella said, of very successful artists who were able to financially become powerhouses. But then there are a lot that are still out there. If we think of how many women go to art school, how many women are emerging artists, and then we look at how many actually make it, the percentage is still very, very low. There's been a lot of studies on that.
Well, I can sort of echo that just in terms of the experience of working in the art world and sort of being, you know, in a history of art course where with 100 people and only 3 men, and then going into the art world and realizing that all the men are in the positions of power and thinking, where were they at university? That's just my own personal experience.
No, but it's true, because if you look at surveys, still we have a predominance of male museum directors, predominance of senior curators are male, and then all the rest underneath are women working.
Yeah, but it's like, well, how did they get there if they didn't study as well? Well, they studied something else and then they shoehorned in. It's like, so all the studies that we do aren't valid. Anyway, I segue. We've had a question and I want to go to Brunella after this. So, but there's one from an alumni from Oxford Said Private Markets Investments. Mansi, thank you very much for your question. They said, is there less financial literacy among female artists to the value or price of their artworks? So they basically don't value it themselves. And do they feel of less worth? So they accept a lower price? Is that something? Or do female artists, are they, she said, or they said, are they not, do female artists not great storytellers to market themselves? So is there an issue around, I guess, confidence and the way you market yourself if you're a female artist? Is that something that you think might have had an effect?
Are you asking me, Lizzie?
Well, I guess, yeah. Well, I guess Sharon and
everybody
then I think Sharon and then to Brunella, that would be great.
I 100% agree. It's a question of value and self-value, but how do you develop self-value? How do you feel that what you do is worthwhile? And that what goes back to, again, in the home. Is your work considered important? Do you have enough strength to consider your work important? And the value of it economically translates into that, just like what you said in the chat, that, then you're willing to accept lower prices because you're so desperate to have your work sold. And that is something about that's both told to you and that you from the inside push out. So there are two sides of it, and the devaluation of women's professional careers leads to a kind of a self-devaluation sometimes. Not presenting yourself professionally to others in the right way, not being told that your work is valuable, but also what you feel on your own. And in Italy, I find that it's very different, for example, from Anglo countries, where we are told very early on as women that we can do everything, that we are wonderful, and that we are really valid professionally. And in Italy, you don't get that same messaging often. And so, I mean, of course, depending on social status, but it's very hard. It's very hard to push on that barrier. Many of these women who were so active in the 70s basically just gave up and became mothers, or their little things. They thought what they were doing was a hobby. They didn't take it seriously enough. And now people are putting an eye on them and saying, hey, what you did 50 years ago was really important. And I'm going to write a book about you, and I'm going to do an exhibition about you. And for them, this is even this woman who we had on the cover of our volume. She was just shocked that 50 years later, somebody would think her art was valuable. So again, I think it's both inner and outer.
Well, actually, the first exhibition we had as part of the Art at Said program was with an artist celebrating her 90th birthday, Kathleen Heinemann. And we took the opportunity, she hadn't shown for about 15 years, and we took the opportunity to show her work at the business school because she had sort of, been in sacrificed her career for, her role as a mother. And actually her work is extremely good. She'd been approached by the same gallery that looks after Hockney, but she never pursued it. She didn't kind of fight for the opportunity because she prioritized her family. But that's an aside. But yeah, so we've definitely, through the business school, helped raise up these stories as well through the art program that we've been doing. Brunella, I wanted to come to you also thinking about value. And I know that you've kind of studied the sort of the wealth management and looking at kind of how art is valued as an asset and how women are kind of sort of looked at within those portfolios. I wonder if you can talk to us more about your experience with looking at that.
Thank you, Lizzie. I think that the main point that we should make in this respect is that we cannot treat art as an asset that we can price in an objective manner. So this is independent on the gender, okay? And it's even harder, it's even harder to say, there are several cases where, the price does not reflect, say, quality. And what is quality in the end in the art? It's very hard to say, right? Unless you're an art historian and the innovation that the artist brought to the market. I'm not an art historian, okay? So my point is that treating art as a financial asset is extremely, difficult because the price of art is influenced by several subjective factors. can be the taste, can be the feeling of the purchaser in that moment, can be fashion, can be, you know, many aspects. And saying that the fact that, you know, women price less is because they do not feel themselves to, you know, I mean, it seems to be a little bit hard to disentangle all these aspects, unless we run an empirical study as Renee did. Okay, so even address the question of the reason why they accept a lower price is because they are financially not you know, developed. This is an empirical question that perhaps require an action studies to be answered. Otherwise, I cannot really say. And even because I do not really know, sorry, go ahead.
I can jump in. So actually
have a go.
in our study, so what we did is we looked at auction prices. And the interesting thing about looking at auction prices is that the artist actually has no direct influence over the auction price, right? So it's buyers of art selling to other buyers of art. So it's sophisticated collectors selling to sophisticated collectors. So actually the artist really has no role in this entire transaction. Which I think is really important because we were really concerned about exactly as Muncie, as you pointed out, at highlighting that it's not just about the artist, it's also about the buyer, right? So of course, if your price is systematically lower, then you will feel terrible and you will lose confidence. It's just like the gender wage gap, right? So if women can persistently get paid less, then of course you internalize it and maybe you don't ask so much, but also it's on the demand side, right? If the demand side is saying, well, we're going to pay you less because you're a woman, it has nothing to do with the artist, right? It has everything to do with the buyer. So of course, you know, that it's a complicated factor, but we can't just say that it's the female artists who are not asking enough. It's also the market that's not providing enough.
And if you were to make a change to the market, how would, you know, how would you, you know, what are the things that you think would help kind of bring around systemic change? Because as you said, this isn't a story that's just unique to the art world. This is one way of looking at the story of gender inequality. And it's just a very pure way of looking at the mass because it's an open market. I mean, it seems to me that there's a sort of some structural things here that need to be looked at. What's your thinking on that, Renee?
Yeah, well, I don't know where to start. So first, I think we have to really think very hard when we talk about merit. I think the concept of merit and meritocracy, we have to recognize that that these concepts are often shaped by those in power, and these concepts tend to serve the interests of those in power, but they're not necessarily objective criteria. So I think we have to recognize that. I think education, obviously, I'm an educator, so I think education is really important across the board. So recognizing that bias can exist is the first step, right? So if you don't see that there's a problem, you're never going to solve it. So the first thing is to see that there's a problem, so we need more education around that. Yeah, so I'll pass it maybe on to Sharon and Brunella for their thoughts on.
I think there needs to be a lot more funding for getting these artists launched. Again, the reason they don't have catalog raisonnés, which is the Bible for their work, is they simply cost too much for them to make. There needs to be more advocacy. I mean, we were talking before, I'm the liaison for the Committee for Women in the Arts at the College Art Association, and they work very hard to bring out exhibitions that are happening, books that are being published. They keep widening their network to get people involved in that world. Any kind of like art fairs and museums that would be devoted exclusively to women. For example, in Switzerland now, there's a wonderful museum in Sousse devoted to Eastern European artists that's doing really amazing things to give them space and visibility. And I think that will help a lot in terms of, again, making their art feel and seem valuable economically.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry for jumping in, but you know, from a pure finance perspective, I mean, when do markets work? Markets work, so price reflects all available information. Markets are efficient when there's transparency and there's liquidity, right? And so a fundamental problem with the art market is it's very non-transparent. So I think more could be done to to increase the transparency. There should be more data. We need more research, right? Which goes back to the funding. So yeah, so these are all really important, I think, aspects that would make the playing field more level.
Do you think there's an element here that, why it's sort of going back to our other sort of webinar that we had, Renee, is like, why do people collect in the first place? It's about maybe, people collect things that kind of represent themselves. And so if there are more men with money in powerful positions, they're going to buy more male artists because they've got the agency. So I think it's a sort of it's a bigger thing. I don't know. That's just my reflection. But I wondered if Brunella could talk to us a bit more. Again, going back to like kind of the finances of like collectors buying male art and how that's sort of justifiable. Is that kind of something that they do because they're buying sort of a representation of what they perceive to be power? I'm just interested in that.
Look, this may be a possibility. So I am a collector, a small collectors of Italian artists. So I can say that I buy what I like it. I don't know whether it represents myself or not. It represents in a sense that I buy what I like it. And but if I get back, I mean, so it is possible that male collectors buy more male artists, but it is also true that at least so far there were more male artists around. So it was much easier to buy male artists by men because there were way so many men artists than female. If I get back to research, it seems that even if now we have this transfer of wealth across generation, there are 81% female collectors more than it used to be like 5-10 years ago, but it doesn't seem the case that female collectors buy more female art, at least to the studies that I have.
That's fascinating. I think that's a really fascinating. So I hadn't realized. So 81% more female collectors, but they're not necessarily buying more female art. What are they buying? Do we know?
No, we do not, because these are aggregate level, and Renee, I can share this info with you. But anyhow, these are some of the art reports that we used to look at. So, and these are at the aggregate level. But as Renee was saying, the point is truly important. We should always remind that the art market is regulated, it is very opaque. So even the information we're speaking of, this limited portion of information, it is there, but it's hidden. It's not collected. It's not discussed. Okay, and same for auction prices. These are at less than 50% of all trades, and the piece of art that are at auction are the ones that, in a sense, have already overcome a threshold. Then there is, you can imagine how many fantastic artists are there, not even that are completely unknown to the mass, but they're great. And so this is a point. And getting back to the wealth management question that you asked at the beginning, and again, if I look at the surveys results, big private banks such as UBS, Credit Suisse, Bank of America, and so on, they provide art-related services. But what they do in many cases, not in all cases, is to provide art-related services to clients who are very wealthy and are already art collectors. So they want to leverage on the fact that a portion of their wealth is say, allocated to art, and they may provide services such as, tax planning, estate planning, insurance services to protect your collection, more than true art finance related services such as now I suggest you to buy this piece of art to put in your portfolio. This is something that is not commonly done, but this is because it's very hard to find to set a proper price, a fair price for art, and the banks do not want to take on this risk. This at least is my impression.
And what do we all think about the art market at the moment? Because I mean, there's a big article in the Times on Thursday by Melanie Gerlis about the millennials breaking the art market, changing in the way that people are buying. I don't know if you saw the article, but it seems to be that there is a shift that's happening at the moment, which is around maybe cost of living crisis here in the UK or globally post-pandemic. There are different ways of people managing their money, and the role that art has to play within that, and the role that's sort of affecting collecting. So what I sort of garnered from the article was more that it's more about kind of people are sort of showcasing their values. They might be collecting more African art. They might be collecting more female-led art. People are kind of collecting more for a purpose than for pure asset. And I just wonder whether that's something that you have seen in your research, and what your thoughts are on the market now and potential shifts going forward, and whether this is a moment of change.
Yeah, this is also my impression that they buy more for purpose, because new generation is so there are more younger collectors, and also my impression was that they look at art as so they look at impact investing in a sense, so a purpose in this respect. They want to perhaps even leverage on their collection in a way that can be useful for the community they belong to. And this is also what I have understood, and this is something that perhaps even wealth managers should take into consideration. So a way, to lever on art is not because simply you can use as a collateral. It's you can truly leverage on the value of art, but a cultural value, network value for next generation. In this respect, I think it's a powerful asset that should be exploited much more.
If I could bring in a point from the last webinar we had where we were talking about art collecting, one point that I really loved about that came out in that webinar is that the collector themselves, in the pure act of collecting and putting together various artworks, can actually create value. So it's like you have the art itself has value, but then as part of a collection, it can gain even more value precisely because of all these, like the purpose behind it. So I thought that was a really fascinating idea that was really interesting.
That's the idea behind that social collection, is that by collecting, she is giving value to these artists, which is an excellent example of agency. And I was just thinking that we don't have the word agency in Italian, and that probably says something. But I was wondering, from Lizzie's point of view as an art advisor, do you advise people to buy women's art?
Absolutely. I mean, also I ran a gallery for 10 years, and this is why I think leadership is important, because people used to say to me, I'm such a champion of women artists. And it wasn't something I did consciously. I hate to say, it was just something I did naturally. I was drawn to the work. And so then for me, there's this point of like, if you put women in leadership positions, maybe it happens naturally. And so maybe there's also that kind of thing, there are more female directors of art galleries now, so that's another reason why there'll be more, women's art out there. But certainly, if it's all about matching the client to the art, and I guess because I have that natural leaning towards liking women's art, it's often like a very strong thing that I'll suggest. I did do something recently where the brief was to prioritize women artists, which I was delighted to do. So it is something that we're now being asked to do as well, because women, certain people want to showcase women more as well. So it's certainly something that I'm being asked to do, but it's also something that I naturally do as well, is how I'd put it. But
so in your position as an advisor, it's a good investment.
well, of course, yeah, it's got to be a good investment because it's so low. So, and I think there are definitely, we were talking earlier about the wives of artists who have been famous, and the example previously of Barbara Hepworth as well. But there are definitely examples of artists who've been in the shadows, who are coming forward now, and it certainly seems like a very good investment. And I think what will be interesting is I'm quite interested in how things are changing so quickly with Brunella's research, like, sort of 30 to 40% in the last 6 years. What's it going to look like in the next 10 years? Like, is this actually, are we in the middle of quite a big societal cultural shift? I mean, it'd be quite nice to think, optimistically that that is what's happening. Um, you know, whether there is going to be this big shift towards collecting women artists and their values going up. But then, we just need to take a quick look at the difference between the Jackson Pollock of, 200 million sort of top price and Joan Mitchell at $29 million, that we realize that actually at the top end, there's a huge difference in how far people are willing to go. So I guess the other point is like, where do we, where do we sort of signal the value? Where do we feel like that's is it cultural, or is it financial, or does financial definitely mean that, is financial value the be all and the end all? I guess that's one of my questions. Maybe Renee, you should answer that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously from my research perspective, I mean, we say the prices are biased. So I guess, you know, what do you make of that? I think it's a bit tricky, right? So, I mean, obviously, I think all the other considerations, like who the person is, do you like the work, all of those are really important. And I just want to remind the audience participants of the experiment that we did, right? Where the first image, which was where the artist was a woman, Annie Albers, people guessed 50-50 that the artist was a man. And the second image, which was an image by Joseph Albers, people were more likely to think that it was the artist was a woman, right? And so I think this really says, something about one has to be really careful to infer too much from information like prices or, all of that. I mean, I think it's really important that the work should speak for itself. And I mean, as Brunella said, she buys what she likes. And that is the real value, right? I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
the key thing, I mean, you were a bit optimistic, Lizzie. I'm quite pessimistic right now. And one of the purposes of having this webinar was to push back against this idea that, investing in women is somehow anti-meritocracy. I think it's a really, really dangerous notion that we're here to speak out against this, right? Because the art world shows us that, you know, just because the price is lower doesn't mean the quality is lower. So therefore, if you support female artists to actually overcome some of the barriers that Sharon has been talking about, is that anti-meritocracy? I would argue, no, it's not anti-meritocracy. It's actually pro-meritocracy, right? So we have to be very, very careful about the assumptions that we make. And, especially, as a finance professor, I feel like I'm qualified to say that we shouldn't trust the markets too much. Right, because if the assumptions don't hold for the markets to work, the market won't work, right? I mean, that's basically what we teach our students. The market works if the assumptions hold. If the assumptions don't hold, the market doesn't work, right? So, I mean, yeah.
Well, I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. Like the assumptions might be wrong within the market, so that's exactly it. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think I guess I have to be optimistic. I work in the art world, and I think I have to think that people's behaviors are changing and things are going to get better. Although there's a very negative world out there at the moment, and there's a lot of talk about meritocracy, and I think having this discussion is really important for people to understand the biases within that structure, and how deeply embedded they are. And I think your work has really helped with that, with that, Renee, in particular. And I think we need more people to kind of really bring it to light in this way, because I think there's a lot of talk, but actually having the facts and the figures and the primary research that the three of you have been doing is really important. It's really important on this.
I was thinking that one thing is to be very committed to these artists, because I mean, in a lot of cases, nobody wanted our book on Italian women artists in Italy, and we just said, thank you, we'll publish it in the UK. We didn't stop publishing it. And then there were people who had a really hard time turning in their essays because they were breastfeeding or had babies, and we, these are important artists they were writing about. We said, we'll give you more time. We made sure that we brought the thing to the finish line, no matter what way and how. And if it wasn't through the front door, we were going to get to the back door. And that is an approach that you have to take when you're working on underdog marginal artists, and also thinking that the margins can be very powerful. They don't have to be central ego driven, Lucia Fontana slashing a canvas, male heroic kind of artists. You can work on other sides of these artists, or you can work on women artists. And if a museum will not take your exhibition, or if a collector will not buy it, you will find somebody else to buy it. The important thing is not to drop the ball. That has been my experience for the last 30 years about this. And I worked for Jenny Holzer, who was the first American woman to represent the United States at the Biennale. And she's a perfect example of that. I mean, she just simply never gave up in terms of her work. And now she commands very high prices and she's very successful. So
An amazing artist.
yeah.
How
In
amazing
the
to work with
90s,
her.
89, she was completely unknown and nobody wanted to give her any space. And I would knock on doors and say, could we please make t-shirts? Could we please make hats? And I went to Benetton to ask to make t-shirts with her words on them. And they said, oh, no, we've never heard of her. And so we went to the printer around the corner in St. Mark's Square in Venice, and we made 1,000 t-shirts and sold out the first night. So you just have to persist. That's the important thing with women artists.
I think resilience is a very important thing, yeah, for women artists and for women generally in business and in the working environment. I mean, I think we haven't got much time left, but I think it would be interesting to know how much a lot of this is mirrored in your work on diversity, Renee, in the sort of financial world as well. Are there parallels that you can bring in?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. Nella can also speak to this, right? I mean, in the financial world and in the academic world, I mean, there's many barriers to women. And then when it comes to evaluating women, again, we get back to this meritocracy argument where people say, well, the women don't live up to the standards set by men. Instead of saying, well, what are the standards that would actually produce the best quality output? That's not the way it's usually framed. It's not like, oh, we want to achieve a certain goal. What will help us achieve this goal? It's like, no, do the women live up to what the men have previously done? And then often that doesn't work, right? Because there's many reasons why, caregiving, all the things that Sharon mentioned. And then, you get back to the meritocracy and then people say, well, the women are not there because, there's something about the women. Oh, they don't like to be in finance. That's why the women are not in finance, because they don't like finance. They shy away from risk. I mean, we get back to all these stories, which are simply not true, right? So it's not a problem of the women. It's a problem of the system. And so, identifying and rectifying these structural inequalities, I think, is really important if we want to actually advance society, right? Which is hopefully what everyone wants to do.
Absolutely. We've had another question which I haven't turned to before now, but just or maybe we can follow this up. But we've had a question about books you'd recommend or papers on this subject. I don't know if there's something everybody can share perhaps later. Or maybe there's something at the tip of your tongue now that you can also recommend.
Certainly René's paper. Certainly René's paper.
I was going to say all the work done by everyone on the panel.
We could put together a little bibliography.
Maybe we can follow up this webinar with that, with some sort of suggested reading. And if you haven't been to see the exhibition, it's not on for much longer at the Business School on In Pursuit of Beauty. I do really encourage you to go and take a look.
Until when? Until when? Will be
I
on?
haven't got the exact date, but I'd say the end of June is what I'm going to say. And so that's a couple of weeks. But I think I just wanted to say thank you to everybody as we sort of draw to a close. If there are not any more questions, it's been such a fascinating conversation. And I'm so grateful for the internet that we can all meet like this and have this webinar and have some amazing women to talk about this who've done such incredible research. It's for me, it's been such a privilege to talk to you all and to really highlight, this sort of fallacy of the meritocracy, I think is a really important discussion to have. So I want to thank you all, Brunella, Sharon, and Renee, for sort of having this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Lizzie, for your excellent moderation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And one last thing, women need to support women.
Yes.
Super important. Last word of hope.